I told you
The
before,
drunken
we are
Apache
not
woman
leaving
tore
this
his shirt,
valley.
but what she
Then you
saw
know
took
what
her
has to
breath
happen
away.
next. There
His
is no
life
other
was
way.
simple but hard. From dawn until dusk, he worked on a ranch owned by an elderly man who had taken him in years ago. The work was physical and exhausting, feeding the animals, mending fences, and repairing old tools, but Daniel had grown used to it. The ranch was isolated, miles away from the nearest neighbor, and the solitude suited him. He liked the peace, the way the desert stretched endlessly around him, broken only by the distant mountains. On one particularly hot evening, the town seemed unusually restless. The sun was sinking behind the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. The trading post, usually quiet at this hour, was bustling with a small crowd of townspeople. Word had spread that someone, or something, was causing trouble near the center of town. Daniel, curious but cautious, decided to take a short break from the ranch work and see what was happening. He walked slowly along the dusty path, his boots kicking up small clouds of sand with each step. The distant sound of shouting grew louder as he approached, and he could see people gathered near the entrance of the trading post, pointing and murmuring to one another. Then he saw her. She was stumbling, clearly intoxicated, her long dark hair tangled and falling over her face. Her eyes were wild, scanning the crowd, and her movements were erratic, almost unsteady. Daniel had heard stories about her. Everyone in town called her the Apache woman. She was known for her fiery temper and fearless nature, traits that had earned her both admiration and wariness from those around her. Some said she had been through too much in her life, and that hardship had carved strength into her that no one could easily challenge. But tonight, whatever she had drunk seemed to have loosened her control, and she was unpredictable. Daniel hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should intervene. People were whispering, some taking cautious steps back, others just watching, frozen by curiosity. The woman suddenly lunged toward him, her hand grabbing the front of his shirt. Before he could react, the fabric tore with a loud rip, leaving his chest partially exposed. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some expected Daniel to strike back or push her away, but he remained calm. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He only looked at her with steady eyes, as if trying to understand why she had done this. For a few long seconds, the air was thick with tension. The town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for chaos to erupt. But then something unusual happened. The woman paused. Her anger, which had driven her forward, began to falter. She blinked rapidly, almost as if she had just realized something. Her eyes widened, and her hand trembled slightly as she released the torn fabric. Daniel noticed the shift immediately. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was a change in the way she looked at him. The fiery intensity in her gaze softened, replaced by a mix of surprise and curiosity. For the first time, Daniel sensed that she was seeing him, not as a target of her anger, but as something more, a person with a story behind those calm, steady eyes. The townspeople were stunned. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Did you see that?" one woman said. She's not going to hit him." Another man shook his head, muttering under his breath about the strange turn of events. No one understood what had caused the sudden pause in her fury. Daniel, however, remained composed. He took a slow, measured breath, feeling neither fear nor anger. His heart was calm, his mind steady. In that moment he understood that sometimes people act out not because of you, but because of the storms they carry within themselves. And perhaps tonight those storms were beginning to shift. The woman's initial aggression had been fierce, almost terrifying. But now, standing there in the fading light, she seemed smaller somehow, not in body but in intensity. Daniel noticed her shaking hands, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her anger had given way to something else, confusion, maybe, or a sudden awareness. For years she had relied on her fiery nature to protect herself, to assert control in a world that had often been unfair. But now, confronted with someone who did not respond with fear or violence, she hesitated. That hesitation was new. That hesitation was powerful. Daniel spoke softly, almost as if he were talking to himself, but loud enough for her to hear. "It's okay," he said. "I'm not here to fight you." His voice was calm, even carrying no judgment. It was a voice that had been shaped by years of hard work and quiet resilience, a voice that could carry authority without force. The woman's eyes met his, and for a moment, all the noise of the town, the murmurs of the crowd, and the clatter of the trading post faded into silence. It was just the two of them, standing in the desert dusk, facing each other in a strange, unexpected pause. Something about that moment reached her. Perhaps it was the steady gaze, the calm presence, or the subtle strength that radiated from him. She lowered her hand slowly, almost reluctantly, as if letting go of the anger that had defined her for so long. Daniel did not move forward or back. He did not offer a hand or demand an apology. He simply waited, giving her space to realize that the confrontation had ended differently than she had expected. The town had seen many fights, many outbursts, but this was different. This was not about victory or defeat. It was about understanding, and for a moment it shone clearly in the quiet desert air. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dusty street, the woman's breath caught. She looked at Daniel, then at the torn shirt, and then back at him again. It was as if something inside her had shifted, a recognition of something she could not name. The anger that had fueled her steps melted into a strange mixture of awe, curiosity, and perhaps even admiration. She had come expecting confrontation and chaos, but instead, she found something entirely unexpected: strength, calmness, and an undeniable humanity. The townspeople began to relax, sensing the change as well. Some smiled nervously, others whispered about the strange turn of events. A few shook their heads, unable to believe what had just happened. But Daniel remained focused, watching the woman carefully, understanding that this was a delicate moment. He did not want to push too far, nor did he want to retreat. He simply allowed the silence to exist, giving her the chance to see him for who he truly was, not a victim, not a target, but a man who had faced life's challenges and emerged steady, calm, and unshaken. For the woman, the realization was almost overwhelming. She had spent so long relying on her anger to protect herself, to navigate a world that often seemed harsh and unfair. But in that instant, she recognized that strength could take many forms. It did not always roar or strike. Sometimes it was quiet, unyielding, and present even in the face of danger. And Daniel embodied that strength in a way that left her breathless. The torn shirt, once a symbol of confrontation, now seemed insignificant compared to the presence of the man who had faced her fury without flinching, without anger, and without judgment. As the evening air grew cooler and the shadows deepened, the woman finally stepped back completely, her eyes never leaving his. Daniel nodded slightly, acknowledging her presence without words. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving the two of them standing in the fading light. It was a strange, quiet moment of understanding, an encounter that began with anger but ended with a silent, unspoken connection. For Daniel, it was a reminder that people's storms often hide deeper truths. For the woman, it was a revelation that strength and courage could exist in forms she had never recognized before. The desert stretched endlessly around them, silent and still. The wind whispered softly through the sagebrush, carrying with it a sense of possibility and change. The torn shirt hung loosely, a reminder of what had happened but no longer defining the moment. In that pause, both Daniel and the woman understood something important. Sometimes, life's most unexpected encounters could teach lessons far greater than any words or actions ever could. And for both of them, this was only the beginning of a story that would change their lives forever. After that strange evening at the trading post, life seemed to settle back into its usual rhythm for Daniel. The ranch remained quiet and isolated, the desert stretching endlessly beyond the fences and fields. Yet, he could not stop thinking about the woman, the Apache woman who had torn his shirt. Her sudden appearance, her fiery nature, and the surprising moment of pause had left an impression he couldn't shake. It wasn't anger or fear that lingered, it was curiosity. Who was she really, beneath the sharp edges of her reputation and the roughness that everyone whispered about in town? Meanwhile, the woman herself was walking home under the soft glow of the moon, her mind replaying the encounter over and over. She had come to the trading post expecting confrontation, perhaps even some small thrill of chaos, but what she had found was completely different. The man she had attacked had not reacted as anyone else would. He had not shouted, nor had he pushed her away with anger. Instead, he had simply looked at her, calm and unshaken, almost as if he understood something she did not. That calmness, that presence, had taken her by surprise. For a woman who had relied on anger and intimidation for much of her life, this unexpected encounter was disorienting, even unsettling. The next day, the town buzzed quietly with gossip. People who had been present at the trading post could not stop talking about the incident. Some expressed disbelief. "I've never seen her pause like that," one man said. "She usually doesn't care about anyone or anything." Others whispered about Daniel. "That man, he didn't even flinch," an older woman said. "There's something about him. I don't know what it is, but it's different." And so, slowly, curiosity began to build in the town about both of them. But for Daniel, and especially for the woman, this was something personal, something beyond gossip, something that had touched them both in ways neither of them fully understood yet. Days passed, and Daniel tried to return to his usual routine. He rose before dawn, tended to the animals, fixed fences, and repaired tools. Yet, despite the physical labor, he found his thoughts drifting to her. He wondered about her past, the life she had led, the storm she must have carried to become so fierce and unpredictable. He felt no fear, only a quiet empathy. He had faced hardships of his own, losses, loneliness, and endless days of backbreaking work. But he had also learned to see the strength in people's eyes, even when they hid it behind anger or toughness. And in her eyes, he had seen something that spoke of pain, struggle, and hidden depth. For her part, the woman found herself avoiding the trading post and other public places for a few days, not out of fear, but because she could not bear to confront the way Daniel's calm had unsettled her. She thought about him constantly. What had he seen in her? Why hadn't he reacted with anger? She realized that no one had ever looked at her like that before, like they saw beyond the surface, beyond the wildness and fury, and into something more human, something vulnerable yet strong. She had spent years building walls, letting no one see the part of her that felt fear, sadness, or doubt. But Daniel had seen through those walls without even trying. Then one afternoon, she found herself at the edge of the desert, walking near the path that led to the ranch. She did not intend to go there, but something, a mix of curiosity and an unexplainable pull, led her closer. Daniel was tending to the animals, just as he did every day. His movements were deliberate, patient, and steady, each action reflecting a deep understanding of the animals and the land he worked on. When she first saw him, she considered turning away, but something held her there. She watched quietly from a distance, noticing the way he moved, the way he cared for the animals, the way he seemed at home in the vast, quiet desert. It was a side of him that no one else had likely ever seen, a side that radiated patience, kindness, and quiet strength. Daniel sensed her presence almost immediately. He didn't know her well, and he certainly didn't expect her to be there, yet he did not appear startled. He simply looked up, his gaze soft but steady, as if acknowledging that she was there, yet giving her the space to decide what to do next. The woman felt a strange mix of emotions, embarrassment for her earlier outburst, curiosity about this man who seemed so unshaken, and a subtle, almost unfamiliar feeling of admiration. She hesitated, unsure if she should walk away or take a step forward. For the first time in a long time, she felt a conflict that was not fueled by anger or pride, but by something more human, an interest, a desire to understand, a need to connect. Eventually, she took a small step forward. Daniel didn't move toward her, nor did he retreat. He remained calm, allowing the silence to speak for itself. It was an unspoken understanding. She had crossed into his space, but he would not judge her for it. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she began to speak. Her voice was quiet at first, unsure. I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said. "I wasn't thinking clearly." Daniel nodded gently, his calm demeanor encouraging her to continue. "It's all right," he replied. "I understand. Sometimes people act before they think. It happens to all of us." That simple acknowledgement, free of anger or judgment, had a profound effect on her. As they began to talk, the woman found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She spoke of her childhood, the hardships she had faced, and the challenges of living in a world that often judged her too quickly. She talked about the loneliness, the moments of fear, and the nights when she felt completely lost. Daniel listened quietly, occasionally asking gentle questions, but mostly allowing her to speak. He had learned that listening, truly listening, was one of the greatest gifts one could offer another person. For the woman, who had spent so much of her life defending herself and keeping others at a distance, this listening felt almost like a lifeline. Daniel shared pieces of his own life as well. He spoke of the ranch, of the responsibility it carried, of the losses and lessons he had faced. He spoke of his family, long gone, and the people who had shaped him into the man he had become. The woman listened, surprised by the depth of his experiences and the quiet resilience he carried within him. It was not the stories themselves that were remarkable, but the way he told them, with patience, humility, and an honesty that left no room for pretension. In that moment, both of them realized that they were not so different. Both had faced struggles, both had carried burdens, and both had learned to survive in their own ways. Hours passed without either of them noticing. The sun moved slowly across the sky, casting warm light over the desert and the ranch. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the scent of the dry earth and distant flowers. Around them, the world seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in this strange, unexpected connection. The woman, once fierce and unpredictable, now felt a calm she had never known in his presence. Daniel, who had always been quiet and solitary, felt a warmth and understanding that he had rarely experienced. In that quiet afternoon, a bridge was formed between two very different lives. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, the woman realized that she had stayed far longer than she intended. She had come expecting confrontation, perhaps chaos, but she was leaving with something entirely unexpected, a sense of respect, understanding, and the beginnings of trust. She looked at Daniel, who remained calm and steady, and felt a subtle shift inside herself. The fire and wildness that had defined her for so long were still there, but now they were tempered by a newfound awareness of another way to be, one that did not rely solely on anger or fear. Before leaving, she took a deep breath, feeling the desert air fill her lungs. "Thank you," she said quietly, almost to herself, but loud enough for him to hear. Daniel nodded, a small, understanding smile on his face. "You're welcome," he replied simply. That brief exchange, simple as it seemed, carried more meaning than words could express. For both of them, it was a moment that marked the beginning of something new, an understanding that life could hold unexpected connections, that people could surprise one another, and that strength could be shown in many different ways. That evening, as the woman walked back toward the town, she felt a change within herself. The encounter at the trading post had been startling, but the afternoon at the ranch had been transformative. She realized that life could offer moments of connection in the most unlikely places, and that understanding another person could open doors that had long been closed. And Daniel, returning to his solitary work on the ranch, felt a quiet hope, knowing that this unlikely meeting had begun a journey that neither of them could yet fully understand, but both would carry with them forever. Days turned into weeks, and the woman found herself thinking about Daniel more often than she expected. Each morning, she woke with memories of their conversations at the ranch, the calm way he had listened, the patience in his voice, and the quiet strength he carried that seemed to fill the space around him. She could not deny that something about him had touched her in a way no one else ever had. The wildness and fire inside her had always been her armor, keeping people at a distance, but with Daniel, she had begun to feel something unfamiliar, the desire to trust. She did not fully understand it yet, but it was real, and it frightened her almost as much as it fascinated her. Daniel, for his part, also felt the pull of their connection. The memory of her tearing his shirt at the trading post had long since faded into a distant moment of tension, replaced by the quiet afternoons they had spent talking and working side by side at the ranch. He had never met anyone like her before. There was a fire in her that both intimidated and intrigued him. She carried scars of life's hardships in her eyes and in the way she moved, alert, ready, and unpredictable. But beneath that exterior, he sensed a deep vulnerability, a longing for understanding and connection that mirrored his own. It was a rare glimpse into another human soul, and he valued it more than he could say. One afternoon, the woman returned to the ranch, this time with a deliberate purpose. She wanted to see Daniel again, not for confrontation or chaos, but because she had a need to understand him and herself. When she arrived, he was repairing a broken fence near the edge of the pasture. The sunlight fell warmly over the dry, golden grass, and the wind carried the faint scent of sage and earth. She hesitated for a moment, watching him work with careful, practiced movements. There was a grace in his strength, a patience in his attention to detail, and she found herself admiring it quietly, almost reverently. This man, who had faced life's struggles quietly and steadfastly, seemed almost untouchable in his calm presence. Daniel looked up and saw her standing at the edge of the pasture. He greeted her with a gentle nod, the kind that acknowledged her presence without demanding explanation or apology. She stepped closer, feeling a nervous energy in her chest. The torn shirt incident, which had once been a source of tension, now felt like a distant memory, almost like a strange prelude to something more important, an introduction to a bond neither of them could have anticipated. She opened her mouth to speak, then hesitated, unsure how to begin. Finally, she said, I wanted to understand. I wanted to know why you didn't react the way I expected." Daniel set down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag. He regarded her calmly, as if expecting the question but not needing to rush an answer. "Sometimes," he began softly, "people act in ways we don't expect because of what they carry inside them. I've learned that anger is often a mask for fear, pain, or loneliness. I didn't react with anger because I try to see beyond the surface. I try to see the person underneath." The woman listened carefully, struck by the honesty and depth in his words. She realized that no one had ever spoken to her like this before, not with patience, not with understanding, and certainly not without judgment. Encouraged by his response, she began to share more of herself than she had ever allowed anyone to hear. She spoke of her childhood, of growing up in a world that had often been harsh and unkind. She talked about the loneliness she had felt, the struggles she had faced in finding her place, and the moments when she had felt completely lost. Her voice wavered at times, but Daniel never interrupted. He only listened, his steady presence allowing her words to flow freely. As she spoke, she felt a weight lifting from her chest, a sense of relief she had never known she needed. It was as if simply telling her story aloud made it real, and being heard without judgment made it bearable. Daniel responded with quiet honesty, sharing his own life's challenges in a way that was both simple and profound. He spoke of the responsibilities of the ranch, the long hours of work, and the losses he had endured over the years. He spoke of family members long gone, of friends who had come and gone, and of moments when he had felt the crushing weight of loneliness. She listened intently, realizing that his life, though different from hers, had been shaped by hardships just as real and painful. In that moment, she began to understand the depth of his character, not just the calm and strength she had admired, but the resilience and empathy that came from truly experiencing life's difficulties. As the afternoon sun moved lower in the sky, the desert seemed to hold its breath around them. The wind whispered gently through the sagebrush, and the distant mountains cast long, soft shadows across the land. There was a quiet intimacy in the shared space, a sense that for these few hours, nothing else in the world mattered. The woman, once defined by her fiery temper and unpredictable nature, felt herself opening to a possibility she had never considered before. The idea that connection, understanding, and trust could exist even in the most unexpected places. And Daniel, who had always valued solitude and quiet reflection, felt the first stirrings of a bond that promised to bring a new dimension to his life. For the woman, the revelation was almost overwhelming. She realized that her anger and fire, which had always been her tools of survival, could coexist with vulnerability and trust. She had spent years believing that showing weakness would make her a target, but Daniel's presence had taught her that strength could be quiet, patient, and compassionate. For Daniel, the experience was equally profound. He had always believed in the value of understanding others, but in this encounter, he saw the transformative power of empathy and listening. Together, they began to explore a new way of being, one that allowed for both honesty and connection, both strength and vulnerability. Their conversations continued over the following days, gradually deepening their understanding of one another. They talked about dreams, fears, and the small, seemingly insignificant moments that had shaped their lives. The woman shared stories of her adventures, the people she had met, and the lessons she had learned from hardship. Daniel shared his routines, the joys and challenges of ranch life, and the quiet moments of reflection that gave him strength. Each conversation built a bridge between them, slowly eroding the walls they had both constructed around themselves. The torn shirt, once a symbol of conflict, now seemed like a distant memory, a prelude to a friendship and understanding neither had expected. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple, they sat together on a small hill overlooking the ranch. The air was cool, and the wind carried the scent of the desert earth and distant wildflowers. For a long while neither spoke, simply enjoying the quiet and the presence of the other. Finally, the woman broke the silence. "I never thought I could feel like this," she said softly. "I mean, I've always been alone. I've trusted almost no one, but with you, I don't know." "It feels different," Daniel nodded, understanding the significance of her words. "It's not easy to open up," he said gently. "But sometimes finding someone who listens, truly listens, can make all the difference." That night, as they parted ways and the desert settled into its familiar quiet, both of them carried a sense of anticipation and possibility. The woman felt a spark of hope she had not experienced in years, a hope that perhaps she could find connection and understanding without losing herself. Daniel felt a quiet joy in discovering someone who could challenge his perspective, someone whose strength and resilience mirrored his own in unexpected ways. The bond between them, forged through patience, listening, and shared experiences, was becoming undeniable, even if neither fully understood where it would lead. In the days that followed, their meetings became more frequent. Sometimes they worked side by side at the ranch, repairing fences or tending animals. Other times, they simply walked together through the desert, talking about life, dreams, and the lessons learned from hardship. Each encounter deepened their understanding of one another, revealing not only their strengths but also their fears and vulnerabilities. The woman, once consumed by anger and unpredictability, found herself learning to trust and to appreciate the calm presence of another person. Daniel, who had always valued solitude, discovered the richness of shared experiences and the power of empathy. Through it all, the torn shirt remained a silent reminder of how their relationship had begun, a moment of tension that had transformed into understanding, a clash of fire and calm that had sparked something entirely unexpected. Both of them knew that their bond was unusual, perhaps even unlikely, but it was real, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. In the quiet of the desert, amid the wind, sagebrush, and endless sky, two very different people were learning to see each other, not as adversaries or strangers, but as fellow travelers on the path of life, each carrying scars, strengths, and stories that made them who they were. By the time the sun rose over the desert on a new day, painting the land in golden light, the woman and Daniel had begun to understand that life could offer moments of connection in the most unexpected ways. The fire inside her was still there, but it was tempered by a newfound awareness and respect. The quiet strength within him had found a counterpart in her resilience and honesty. Together, they were discovering that true understanding and trust were built not through confrontation or dominance, but through patience, empathy, and the willingness to see the person beneath the surface. And in that realization, both of them felt the promise of something lasting, something that could change their lives forever. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Daniel and the woman grew stronger. Their encounters, once hesitant and cautious, became more natural and frequent. She would arrive at the ranch with a quiet determination, no longer fueled by anger or chaos, but by a genuine desire to connect, to understand, and to be understood. Daniel welcomed her presence with the same calm patience that had first impressed her, giving her space when needed and offering guidance when asked. Their shared moments were small but meaningful, working together on chores, walking through the desert, and talking about life, dreams, and the challenges that had shaped them. One warm afternoon, the woman arrived at the ranch carrying a small basket filled with herbs and fruits she had collected from the nearby hills. She had begun to take an interest in the ways Daniel lived and worked, and she wanted to contribute in her own way. The gesture surprised Daniel, who was not used to receiving gifts or attention from anyone outside his small circle. Yet, he accepted it with a simple nod and a quiet smile, appreciating the thought behind the act rather than the object itself. In that moment, she realized that small acts of kindness could be as meaningful as grand gestures, and Daniel's gentle acknowledgement made her feel valued in a way she had rarely experienced before. While working together that day, Daniel taught her how to properly care for the animals, how to mend fences efficiently, and even how to recognize subtle signs of illness or distress in the livestock. She listened intently, eager to learn, but also to prove to herself that she could be disciplined and capable in a world she had long viewed as harsh and unforgiving. With each lesson, a sense of pride began to grow within her, a pride not born from confrontation or dominance, but from genuine skill, effort, and the realization that she could contribute meaningfully. Daniel noticed the change in her demeanor. Her wildness was still present, but it was tempered by focus, care, and a newfound patience. Their conversations, too, deepened during these long afternoons. They spoke of memories from childhood, of moments that had left lasting impressions, and of the struggles that had shaped them both. The woman shared stories of places she had traveled, people she had met, and lessons she had learned from hardship and solitude. Daniel shared his experiences on the ranch, the challenges of maintaining the land and animals, and the quiet joys that came from living in harmony with nature. Through these exchanges, they began to see each other not only as individuals but as kindred spirits, both shaped by life's difficulties, both resilient, and both capable of growth and change. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky with streaks of orange and purple, they walked together along a narrow path that wound through the hills near the ranch. The air was warm but gentle, carrying the scent of wildflowers and sagebrush. They spoke little at first, content to simply walk side by side, sharing a comfortable silence that had become familiar and reassuring. Then, the woman turned to Daniel and spoke softly. "I never thought I could feel so understood," she said. "Most people see me only for the anger or the fire I carry, but you see more. You see the person I am beneath it all." Daniel nodded, his expression gentle but thoughtful. "It's not always easy to see, but I've learned to look beyond the surface. There's always more to a person than what they show to the world." The woman smiled, a rare and genuine smile that lit up her face in a way few had ever witnessed. For the first time in years, she felt that someone truly valued her for who she was, not who they assumed she was. That realization brought both relief and a strange sense of vulnerability. She had spent so long building walls to protect herself from judgment and disappointment, but with Daniel, those walls began to crumble, revealing a part of herself she had kept hidden even from herself. And Daniel, in witnessing this change, felt a sense of responsibility and care, a desire to nurture the trust she had placed in him without taking advantage of it or pushing her too far. Over the following days, their bond continued to deepen through shared work and quiet conversations. The woman began to show initiative, helping with chores without being asked and offering suggestions for improving the daily routine. Daniel appreciated her efforts, but more importantly, he admired the confidence she was slowly developing. It was not the confidence of arrogance or dominance, but the quiet assurance that came from knowing one's abilities and worth. The woman, in turn, learned to respect Daniel not only for his calm strength, but also for his humility and patience, qualities that were rare and deeply admirable. One afternoon, as they rested in the shade of a large mesquite tree after a long morning of work, the woman spoke about her dreams, something she rarely did. "I've always wanted to travel," she said, gazing at the distant mountains. "To see the world beyond this town, beyond the desert, but I never thought it was possible." Daniel listened thoughtfully, considering her words. "It's never too late," he replied gently. "The world is bigger than we often realize, and it's never too late to start exploring it." His words resonated deeply with her, planting a seed of hope she had thought long dead. She realized that with trust, patience, and support, she could begin to imagine a life beyond survival, beyond anger, and beyond the limitations she had placed on herself. Their connection was not without challenges, however. The woman's fiery temperament occasionally resurfaced, leading to moments of tension or disagreement. Yet, each time, Daniel responded with calm understanding rather than frustration or judgment. He listened to her concerns, validated her feelings, and gently guided her toward reflection rather than conflict. These moments, though difficult, became opportunities for growth. The woman learned to manage her impulses, to consider her actions and their consequences, and to trust that strength did not always come from confrontation. Daniel, in turn, learned patience and empathy, understanding that trust and connection were built gradually, through respect, consistency, and care. One evening, as the desert sky filled with stars, they sat together outside the small ranch house, sharing a quiet meal. The air was cool, and the only sounds were the distant rustle of sagebrush and the soft breathing of animals settling for the night. The woman looked at Daniel, a mixture of gratitude and admiration in her eyes. "I never imagined life could feel like this," she said. "I mean, I've always been alone, always fighting for myself. But now it feels like there's someone beside me, someone who understands." Daniel smiled, touched by her honesty. "You've never been truly alone," he replied softly. "Even when life feels difficult, even when people judge you, there are always moments and people that remind us we're not alone. We just have to recognize them." That night, as they parted ways, the woman felt a profound sense of change within herself. The desert, once a symbol of isolation and struggle, now felt like a place of possibility. The ranch, once a place of work and solitude, had become a setting for growth, connection, and understanding. She realized that the bond she was forming with Daniel was more than friendship. It was a relationship built on mutual respect, empathy, and the quiet courage to see and accept one another fully. And Daniel, returning to his quiet work, felt a sense of fulfillment he had rarely experienced, a sense that his patience, understanding, and quiet strength were making a difference in someone's life. Over the following weeks, their interactions became a rhythm of shared life. They worked, laughed, and reflected together, each encounter strengthening their bond. The woman began to take pride in her progress, in her ability to manage her impulses, and in her growing understanding of herself and Daniel. Daniel, in turn, found joy in her company, in the moments of shared effort and understanding, and in the realization that trust and connection could flourish even in the most unexpected circumstances. The torn shirt, which had once symbolized anger and chaos, now seemed a distant memory, a strange but meaningful beginning to a relationship that had grown into something much deeper. By the time the sun set over the desert one evening, casting long golden shadows across the land, both Daniel and the woman understood that their lives had changed in ways neither had anticipated. They had discovered the power of empathy, the importance of patience, and the transformative effect of trust and understanding. What had begun as a moment of conflict had blossomed into a connection that brought hope, growth, and a sense of possibility to two lives that had once felt isolated and burdened. And as the stars appeared in the night sky, they both felt a quiet certainty that this was only the beginning of a journey that would shape their lives in profound and lasting ways. The weeks and months that followed were full of quiet growth and unexpected joy for both Daniel and the woman. What had begun as a strange, tense encounter at the trading post had transformed into a profound connection, one built on understanding, patience, and shared experiences. The desert, once a backdrop of isolation and survival, now felt like a living, breathing space that held the promise of friendship, trust, and even hope. The woman, whose fiery temper had defined her life for so long, began to experience a new kind of strength, one that came from empathy, respect, and the knowledge that she did not have to face the world alone. Daniel noticed the changes in her gradually but clearly. Her movements were more deliberate, her gaze steadier, and her confidence more natural. She approached challenges with thoughtfulness rather than impulsiveness, and she no longer relied solely on anger to assert herself or protect her space. He admired her resilience, not just for the fiery energy she carried, but for the willingness she had shown to grow and adapt. At the same time, he realized that his own life had been quietly transformed. The presence of the woman brought a warmth and depth to his days that he had not known was missing. She challenged him to see the world differently, to engage with life and people more fully, and to embrace connection without fear. One afternoon, as the desert sun cast long golden shadows across the ranch, the woman arrived with a basket of freshly picked fruits and herbs. She had begun to take an active role in caring for the land and the animals, and she wanted to contribute in a meaningful way. Daniel greeted her with a warm nod, appreciating her effort and thoughtfulness. Together, they worked through the tasks of the day, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending the small garden Daniel had cultivated. Their teamwork had become seamless, a quiet rhythm of cooperation and mutual respect. It was in these shared moments of labor that the bond between them deepened, strengthened by the unspoken understanding that each valued the other's presence, effort, and perspective. As the day wore on, they paused to rest under the shade of a large mesquite tree. The desert stretched endlessly before them, the sky painted with warm hues of orange, pink, and purple. The woman looked at Daniel and spoke softly, her voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and wonder. "I never thought I could feel like this," she said. "I mean, I've spent so long defending myself, relying on my anger to survive. But now it feels like there's someone beside me, someone who sees me for who I really am." Daniel smiled, a gentle, understanding smile that conveyed more than words ever could. "You've always been strong," he said quietly, "but strength comes in many forms. Sometimes it's quiet and steady like the desert. Sometimes it's fiery like the storms. The important thing is knowing when to use each kind of strength and recognizing it in others." The woman absorbed his words, realizing how much she had learned from him, not just about life, but about herself. She began to understand that trust, patience, and empathy were not signs of weakness, but rather powerful tools that could transform relationships and even one's own sense of self. In Daniel, she had found a mirror of her own resilience, tempered by calm and understanding, and in her, Daniel had discovered a spirit both fierce and capable of growth. Together, they had created a space in which both could explore their strengths and vulnerabilities without fear or judgment. Over the following days, their bond became stronger through shared experiences and quiet reflection. They began taking walks through the desert, exploring its hidden trails and observing the subtle changes in the landscape. They shared stories of the past, reflecting on the hardships they had faced and the lessons they had learned. The woman spoke of her travels, her encounters with strangers, and the moments that had left lasting marks on her heart. Daniel shared tales of the ranch, the animals he cared for, and the quiet moments of beauty he found in nature and solitude. Through these conversations, they discovered not only their similarities, but also the ways in which they complemented one another. The calm balance to her fire, the courage to face challenges, and the mutual respect that allowed each to grow. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep indigo, they sat together on a small hill overlooking the desert. The air was cool, and the distant mountains cast long, gentle shadows across the land. For a long while neither spoke, simply enjoying the comfort of shared silence. The woman finally broke the quiet, her voice soft but steady. "I feel like I've changed," she said. "I never thought I could trust someone like this. I never thought I could feel safe, understood, or appreciated, but with you it feels different. I feel lighter." Daniel looked at her, a mix of admiration and care in his eyes. "Change is never easy," he replied. "But it's worth it when it allows us to see life and ourselves more clearly. You've shown me that even the strongest storms can be balanced by calm, steady strength." As the days turned into weeks, the woman began to take on responsibilities at the ranch with increasing confidence. She learned to handle the animals, repair fences, and tend to the small garden, all under Daniel's gentle guidance. Each task she completed brought her a quiet sense of accomplishment, reinforcing the knowledge that she was capable of growth, contribution, and meaningful connection. Daniel observed her progress with pride, not just for the skills she had acquired, but for the transformation in her demeanor, the way she carried herself with newfound confidence, tempered by patience and understanding. Their friendship also deepened through small acts of kindness and shared laughter. Daniel would teach her how to make practical repairs, and she would surprise him with simple gifts, such as fresh herbs, hand-picked flowers, or a carefully prepared meal. They found joy in these small exchanges, realizing that true connection often resides not in grand gestures, but in the simple, consistent acts of caring for one another. The torn shirt, which had once symbolized anger and confrontation, now seemed almost irrelevant, a relic of a moment that had sparked the beginning of a transformative bond. One afternoon, as they rested by the edge of a small creek, the woman spoke about her dreams for the future. "I've always wanted to see the world," she said, "but I never thought I could. Life has always been about survival, about protecting myself, about anger. But now I feel like there's more I can do, more I can see, more I can experience." Daniel listened thoughtfully, encouraging her to continue. "The world is bigger than we often imagine," he said, "and it's never too late to start exploring it. Sometimes it's the connections we make that give us the courage to take those first steps." The woman smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest she had not known for years. She realized that her life had changed in ways she could never have anticipated. The fiery, unpredictable woman who had once torn his shirt in anger had begun to discover the strength that came from understanding, patience, and connection. Daniel's calm, steady presence had shown her that vulnerability could coexist with strength, that trust could be given without fear, and that true courage often lay in opening oneself to others. As the days grew warmer and the desert flowers began to bloom, their relationship reached a quiet but profound turning point. They were no longer just two individuals connected by circumstance. They were partners in life's work, companions in the quiet beauty of the desert, and supporters of one another's growth. Their bond had evolved from confrontation to curiosity, from curiosity to understanding, and from understanding to genuine care and respect. They had discovered that life's most meaningful connections often arise from the most unexpected encounters, and that patience, empathy, and shared effort could transform even the most unlikely relationships into something lasting and profound. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, the woman turned to Daniel with a soft smile. "I never imagined life could feel like this," she said. "I never imagined I could feel safe, understood, and appreciated. But with you I do. You've changed my life." Daniel looked at her with gentle admiration, feeling the truth of her words resonate deeply. "And you've changed mine," he replied. "You've reminded me that life is richer when shared, and that connection and understanding are gifts we give one another every day." In that moment, both realized that their lives had been transformed by the simplest of beginnings: a torn shirt, a moment of anger, and an unexpected pause that had led to understanding. What had started as a chaotic encounter had become a profound journey of growth, trust, and connection. They had discovered that strength was not only in fire or resilience, but also in patience, empathy, and the courage to be vulnerable. And in that realization, they felt a deep, abiding sense of gratitude for each other, for the desert that had brought them together, and for the unexpected twists of life that had allowed them to find one another. As the night settled over the desert, the stars twinkling in the clear sky, Daniel and the woman stood side by side, looking out over the land that had become their shared space. The wind whispered gently through the sagebrush, carrying with it a sense of peace, possibility, and hope. Both knew that their journey was far from over, but they also knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger, wiser, and connected in a way that neither had ever imagined possible. The torn shirt, once a symbol of anger and confrontation, had become a symbol of transformation, growth, and the extraordinary power of understanding and human connection. And in the quiet of the desert night, two lives that had begun in isolation and struggle now stood intertwined, ready to face whatever the future might bring together.